Brun Canutesson, nicknamed the crossbow guy for some reason or another. Got a few things to tell you today about crossbows, is how they evolved from earliest days to modern days. I'm probably going to run out of time, so I may actually stop and not actually go into modern. I may stop about 1500. But we're going to look at the four major areas where crossbows evolved. The first thing that we always look at with a crossbow is what kind of prod has it got. Okay, that would be one major factor on it. The second thing would be what kind of triggers it got. The next thing we look at is what kind of mechanism is in place to hold the prod on the end of the stock. And then lastly, how are we going to cock that thing? Because there comes a point where we are not strong enough to do it repetitively by ourselves. We need mechanical advantage. And that whole idea of mechanical advantage is what's the key to crossbows, because it's what allows a individual that has minimal training to be effective in war. Now, why is that a good idea? Well, how many lords of manors do you think wanted to have all their people highly trained to kill somebody if they happen to have a little bit questionable methods of collecting taxes? How much control do you think they would have wanted to have? Okay, crossbows you can limit. You can physically pick up a crossbow and block it away. Longbows, not so much. Relatively easy to make. Crossbows require a lot of technical skills in order to make, and that takes up for some of the skills needed in order to use them. So they're kind of popular for that. And it's a whole lot easier to have a guard riding on horseback or standing guard at a gate or something like that has a crossbow than a longbow, because it takes a couple seconds to get it loaded if you're talking about a longbow. But if it's a crossbow, you can stand there loaded all day long, and that's why they're popular on the SCA battlefield. You can stand there and let your bow be loaded and wait for them to call lay on, and your arrow is in the air before they finish the words of on. It really surprises people. But we're going to look at all this, and we're going to look at as power goes up, the technology gets more and more important. Because when you first look at the first crossbows that were out there, this is one example of one of the most simple ones. It's called the Little House bow. To be honest, this thing's not even that much more powerful than a longbow. Okay? But it's really, really simple. It's got a simple trigger. It's got a simple mechanism for putting the bow on there. The prod itself is nothing more than a piece of wood. It doesn't require any kind of mechanism that's external. It may require a little bit of a cocking aid, which could simply be a rope that you put your foot through. And we're going to look at starting with these, and we're going to end up with something a little bit more complicated. Late period pellet bow. Kind of the SCA or medieval version of a rifle. They started using these because they got tired of losing their arrows and bolts when they were shooting at birds. But if they used a clay pellet, who cares if you have a baked clay pellet and you never find it again? Fire as many times as you want, and it costs you dirt. You could almost say it was dirt cheap. I know, I'm waiting all day to say that bad joke. This is a quote from Gorman. And it says, often the crossbow has been treated as if it was a single weapon of uniform design and function. But this is a misleading conceptualization of the weapon. Crossbows were made in a variety of styles with several different types of laths, and the crossbow changed significantly across the century of use. See this word right here? Lath, lathe, prod. Every culture that had a crossbow had a different name for each one of the parts. So, you got a prod, you got a bow, you got a lathe. We're talking about the same thing, so, bear with me if I switch cultures when we talk about some of the different bows, okay? It's not a big deal. But, most regions of the world adopted a crossbow, some for function or other. They're still in use for some of the Norwegian countries, for some of the folks that are doing whale hunting. Do it the old way. Yeah, a rifle's probably a little bit more convenient, but a crossbow is going to be a whole lot more cost effective. When we look at prod styles, before 1350, we're going to find that most of our prods are going to be wood. Why? Technology. Okay? And when I talk about wood, I'm also talking about bamboo for your folks that like to talk about the Oriental cultures. They use a lot of bamboo instead of hardwood. Why? Why not? It's cheap.
Available.
They've got it everywhere. It's very flexible and very strong. Around 1300, 1500, they went to composite prods. What is that? Well, we'll look at those, but it's basically a wooden prod that's had stuff added to it. It's your wood plus some. And then when technology got really, really good, they went to steel prods. Why? Because they could. But you know what? A steel prod is expensive because it's going to have to be basically spring steel. Okay? So, are you still going to find composite prods out there? You darn too. When it got broken, they may have added a steel prod to it. For example, the bow this was modeled after was originally made with a composite prod. At some point in history, the prod was replaced with a steel prod. So when I reproduced this one, I reproduced it with a steel prod. Yes?
How do we know that it was originally made with for the other type and not steel?
Time frame. The time frame when it was made. With conjecture, and also you look at the depth of the notch where the prod would go in, and it was a little bit deeper than would be needed for a steel prod. So we'd be able to guess. A lot of stuff you deal with crossbows, you're going to be guessing and stuff. Okay. The reason you're going to be guessing is because crossbows were like the trophy that everybody brought home from war, hung them up on the wall, and as time went on, they got added to. We got a lot of bling added to them. For example, you may find a 1300 crossbow hanging on a castle wall that has 1600s engraving on it. Okay? Great-great-great-grandpappy's crossbow hanging on the wall looks a little dull. Why don't we send it out to the silversmith and have him add something to it, make it into a trophy? Okay? So, can't really tell exactly what it would have been eventually, but you can make some educated guesses. A wooden prod, we've got the earliest known one we've got was dug up and was dated back to 1216. That does not mean that was the earliest crossbow. Okay? It's just the oldest one we found. Why is it such a big deal? Well, man, that is really beat up. I'm just surprised that whoever found it recognized it as a crossbow prod and not as a stick or a root. Archaeologists must have really been on their game that day. But this was found and named the Berkhamsted bow from the location where it's found in England. Composite prod, we're going to have a wooden core. Then we're going to put some horn in there. Then we're going to put layers and layers and layers of sinew in there. It's going to be a stinky operation to make this because you're going to be using a lot of horn glue and you're going to make a lot of mess. But you can get a prod that's close to 1,000 pounds pull out of this thing. You can't do that with wood. You just simply can't do it. It's not going to happen.
Brun?
Yes?
What time period is this particular construction from?
1350, 1500, maybe later. Because just because they could go to a steel prod doesn't mean that they did because of cost. You'll find some of the solid wood ones without any of the composite that still stay on because they were simply able to be done, and for a lower power bow that was good enough. I mean, on modern terms, are we still shooting black powder because we can?
So this would have been the type of crossbow you would have seen at Crecy and Poitiers?
Yes. Yes. But they may have had some of the lighter ones that were just straight wood. They may have. I mean, once something is built, I have serious doubts it ever really got phased out. It may have been upgraded, but you know, if it
They didn't waste stuff.
No, nothing was ever wasted. Nothing was ever wasted. Now, I will say honestly, this little house bow probably was made in a day and a half and didn't look half as good as this when it was made originally by a carpenter. And so it probably may have actually gotten thrown in the fire after a siege or something like that because they didn't want them hanging around. They might not have cared a whole lot because it was so simple to make.
Yeah, probably not after a siege, but probably after a shade by shade.
Yeah.
Which would be a campaign.
Yeah. When you come back
At
home.
in the summer, rather than bring it back on the boat.
Yeah. You know, let's face it, soldiers are lazy. I was a soldier, I'll be honest. If you carry it home, you're gonna have to take care of it, and some sergeant's gonna come around and tell you to maintain it. So, you know, if you happen to lose it over the side of the boat, or you happen to, you know, throw it in the campfire, we'll get another one. Steel prods, they're all different weights and sizes. We've got little bows, we've got big bows, we've got bows that are up to 1,000 pounds. Doubt seriously if you go on a campaign with a 1,000-pound bow, but you sure would be defending the castle with one. So some of the things we're going to look at are not as portable as others, simply because of the weight. You'll be surprised when I pass this around. I'll go and pass around. This is not a light bow. It's about a 500-pound pull. It scares me to fire it. I like to fire it from a stand and stand off, because one day it's going to blow up. It's not a matter of crossbows when they're going to, if they're going to blow up, they will blow up one day. If nothing else, the string's going to break. You know, I don't know if anybody that's any more dedicated to keeping their equipment in good shape than somebody that's scared of it, though. Pass that around. Now, cocking devices. Gotta start with those because you gotta be able to cock it if you're gonna fire it. What is the good of a crossbow if you can't get it loaded? And you're going like, I'm big and bad and I can cock a 200-pound bow. Okay. What about your little skinny guy over here that uses a mechanical device and can do 400 pounds and can outrange you by, you know, twice your range?
How fast could they cock things?
That's the question. We're going to look at that. If you've already got it cocked, it's really fast to fire. But as things get more complicated, the speed slows down. That's why if you can cock it manually, you probably will. The first method is the feet on the prod method. This is the earliest method, and it's simply a matter of putting your feet on the prod and pulling it back. It's a step up from putting the butt in your belly and pulling it back. I do the butt and the belly method for STA combat because we're limited to about 70 pounds. But there are some people that can't do this. Now, is it possible you can have an improvement over this? Yeah. First of all, do you want to put your shoes on top of that prod? Okay, first thing that's going to happen is it's going to start trying to knock the bindings loose because you're putting it in the mud. Second thing, you can get all caked up with mud down here on the end and the crossbow prod's not going to fit in there. Got a problem. So, we can fix that. We can put a foot stirrup on it. Okay? What's the second factor of the foot stirrup? It picks it up off the ground a little bit more so you don't have to bend over as much. For those of you guys that are 20 years old, you don't know this. When you get 50 and older, bending over a certain distance makes a difference. You don't bend over as much as you used to. Okay? Yes?
What time period did you start seeing more foot stirrups on those?
These started about 1100-ish.
Okay.
But not always. The funny thing is, a foot stirrup can be added to a bow pretty easily. So some had it, some didn't. You know, it depends on whether or not you did it yourself. Would a landlord of a castle have wanted to go to that much trouble for it if he was in a hurry? Maybe not. But if you had the bow for, you know, a couple weeks, would you maybe take it to the local blacksmith and have it added while you're on campaign if he has some extra time? You can upgrade your gear. It happens.
I take the material was wrought iron for the foot stirrups.
Typically, but you can also do it with rope.
Okay.
One method of doing the rope is you simply tie it around here and have a big loop that comes around. I've got one of those on this bow right here.
Oh, cool.
Now, I'm going to tell you that this is bigger than they would have done because we have bigger feet than they had. And our shoes are not as pointy as they had. Okay? So all my foot stirrups are made for modern shoes and modern boots. Because it does no good if you can't get your foot in there. This is my bow I just made for a Penzic, and it's got a great big honking foot stirrup on it. But I can get a boot with a steel toe in it.
Now, are you using that for a target? Or
I'm going to use this for combat.
What's your rate of fire?
It's actually gonna be a little bit slower than my last one, but my last one I was able to get, my record is probably 280 shots in an hour-long ravine battle.
Oh, that's cool. So you're talking
You
6
know,
a minute, that's fast.
Several a minute.
That's 6 a minute, that's fast.
Yeah, but I'm pretty good at it, and I also like the bulbous butts on here because it goes in my belly a little bit better, and I can just do it instinctively, and I just belly cock them. I don't bend over to use the foot slurp anymore because my back doesn't like it. Not at all. I'm getting old for some reason. It's all my birthdays.
What? What's this old thing you're talking about?
I'm not saying I am old, I said I'm getting old. Now, there's also another device you could do that we don't use in the SCA because it's not necessary. It's only necessary in the larger bolts. But this is a device where they put a single hook on your belt, and you hook it over the string, you pick your foot up, and you push the foot down, and you push it down in order to operate it. There's a catch to that. All those guys that have no waistline can't use this because it pulls the belt off. Yeah. Okay? Let's face it, he's a skinny guy with hips. Okay? Or gal. Doesn't matter. But you can go up from that, and instead of just having a single hook that comes down, you can put a winch on there, a couple pulleys. Yes, we're getting more and more complicated, but as we get mechanical advantages in here, what are we doing to the amount of power that we can put into it? Tim Allen's, comes to mind, the whole more. Why is that important with a crossbow? More power equates more range. If you can kill your opponent before they get in range of you, you got a much better chance of walking off the field alive. So you want to get him dead way out yonder, okay? Different kinds of methods. You can do ropes, or you can do a leather strap. The whole thing is, you've got a pulley here. Yes, that doesn't look like much, but that is a pulley mechanism. It's a rolling ring, and it basically doubles the amount of pulley you're able to put on that. Now, for those of you that are guys that are out there in the gym, which is stronger, your arms or your legs? You can do a whole lot more on the mechanisms with your legs, can't you? And then if you double that, I'm going to say on the average, most modern folks could probably cock a 300-pound crossbow with this. You're putting 150 pounds on of pressure into the system. Now, what's the problem with this? It's slowing things down. It's slowing them down a lot. And you got to be a little bit more coordinated because you're standing on one foot. So how many are coordinated enough to stand on one foot and fire a crossbow and do all kinds of crazy stuff while people throwing stuff at us?
And wearing armor.
And wearing armor.
Muddy field.
Muddy field, grass. You're guaranteed you're going to be standing on a rock.
Right.
A little rock. It'll make you unsteady. You can switch to a whip. What does that do? It's just a lever. Hooks into the front of the bow. It's got a lever here. It pushes the string back. What's my problem with these? They're cumbersome, they slow you down, and it's easy to drop it. I don't know about you guys, but I have discovered over the years of fighting, I get clumsy on the battlefield. I drop more stuff on the battlefield than I ever would around camp. I don't understand why. I guess I get in a hurry. You're looking at about 300 pounds you can pull these back with, but it's an extra piece of gear that you've got to keep up with, haul around, and actually remember to use. So, yeah, I've made a couple of them. I don't know that I'm really thrilled with them, but I sure would rather do a whip than the other previous mechanisms where we've got to have a rope that's hanging around your ankles that you're probably going to trip over if you start running away.
Good on the siege though.
Yeah. Here's one in action. What's the catch to it? You also got to have a bow that's set up for it. Got to have a ring on the end of it of some sort, or a foot stirrup. Okay? Now, can you come up with other mechanisms? There were a few where instead of hooking into the ring in the front, they would actually have a fork that would hook into the prod. Goat's foot, a little bit different, same kind of idea, but it hooks around a pin in the back. Now, when you go look at a crossbow, you look at a museum, can you start getting some ideas of like, hey, if I see a pin right here, it probably had a goat's foot on it at one point. Because they're not going to put stuff on there that they don't need, right? Keep in mind that this pin is going to be about 5 inches or less from the trigger, because there's other pins that are going to be further back for other devices we're going to look at. So if it's a closed pin, probably had a goat's foot. Now, what are the odds that goat's foot got lost at some point over time or got switched out? You know, soldiers are bad about mixing gear up. I'm sorry, but you know, I was crazy when I was dealing with my gear that they issued to me. This is my favorite, but also probably the slowest mechanism. Okay, it's a windlass. Got a crank on it. You can probably go on this one, depending on how many ropes you put on this one. This one's going to be better. You might do 1,000 pounds with this. But because of the mechanical advantage there, you're going to maybe get your rate of fire down to like 2 minutes. Okay? That's real bad if you're charging. It ain't so bad if you're defending a castle. Now, let me ask you a question. Could you have one person standing there firing that had a little bit of skill, and 3 other people standing back behind it, loading bows and just handing them to them? We did it during the westward expansion of America. You know, they show the Western movies all the time. You know, having kids loading rifles and handing them back to daddy. Okay. Well, Cranach is the same thing. Could you also have a Cranach back there? Now, here's the thing. This was made by a clockmaker, somebody highly skilled. It probably would cost somewhere around 6 or 7 years worth of salary for an average worker. How many of those do you think are out there?
Not many.
There's less than 20 left in the world.
And you own like half of them.
No. I don't have an original. I can't afford an original. There's other things I would rather spend my money on. All it is a gear, which is one of my things. I do gears for mundane life, and I love it a lot. But, you know, they're a little complicated. They do have a little bit of an issue with cost, and they're heavy. They're finicky. This is one I made, and good Lord, I'm glad my wife's not here, but I probably got $400 in it. You know.
More than that when you prevent me from showing her this video.
I'm in trouble then. I think I'm buying her another horse.
No, I think the crank's cheaper.
This is my favorite device. Spanbach, German. Basically, it's a mechanical cocking device. It's on a stand. They would throw the bow into it, and you could have a child do it, and your rate of fire would be huge. Because all it is a huge long lever that pulls back the same hook we would have used from a belt hook, but it's got a hook into the, hook into this piece right here. Just done. You put one guy on that, or one girl, or one scrawny peasant, and one night on the parapet, and you can have a rate of fire that would just be tremendous. Now, how many of these are survived? I think 2.
Where at?
Germany. Where else? Germany's the home of all the wonderful medieval technology, you know. I'm not a German at heart, but, I kind of would probably get lost in some of their museums for years. This is another device that could have been used to cock a bow, but it came from the Loeffel-Holtz Codex, and we can't really tell if it ever got built. I mean, somebody thought of it. If I built one of these, I would use it more along the lines of building bows rather than cocking them, because I could use it to put the string on the first time. That's always a lot of fun. But with this, big screw in it, that longer screw probably would have been, 20 to 30 salaries.
How long is the screw in that one?
Huh?
How long is that screw?
No clue. It's just an illustration. I'm going to guess that this is probably 24 inches to get it up to a reasonable height for use. Most benches would be about 24 inches over. So using ratios, I'd say it's probably about a 40-inch long screw.
It's a big wood screw.
And it could have been made out of metal.
Yeah. It would've been enough.
That's got a lot of similarities to the jig they use to put rifling in barrels.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
I mean,
more.
wood screws were used in presses for paper and stuff at the time, so.
It had to have been really, really expensive. I mean, there's not one out there that I could find. I don't know if it was ever built. You know, found a place where it was illustrated where they might build it, you know, but shoot. Now this guy claims it actually exists. Harmuth, he thinks it was made. But he couldn't tell me where it was made, so, you know, in his book, so he didn't let that out. Now, after you got a really strong bow, you gotta run into the idea of, you gotta keep it cocked, don't you? Because if you don't keep it cocked and you don't have a trigger mechanism or a lock mechanism, you got a long bow. Okay? So you gotta have a trigger mechanism of some sort. You gotta hold it cocked, and then you've got to do the scary thing of releasing it. Is it possible you could make a trigger mechanism that was so good that you couldn't get it to release?
Yes.
Yep. Gastrophedes had a device that is most commonly seen these days in siege weapons for the SCA. Nobody ever builds a Gastrophedes style crossbow for target use because it takes forever to load. The way this works is there's an entire large portion of it, a track, that moves forward. You push it into the ground and put your belly on it, and you shorten the whole length of the stock by about 3 feet in order to cock it. Probably the slowest loading bow I've ever thought about. Never seen one, but you know, probably gonna be on my list to build just because. We'll see. But Greeks used them before Christ. Around about the time of 200 BC, the Chinese came up with this idea. Man, would I love to build one of these for the SCA, but they won't let me use it on the combat field because it's a pistol crossbow.
What?
Pistol crossbows are banned.
Yeah, you can't have a pistol grip.
The grip is banned.
For a long time.
You can't go gangster with your crossbow?
Nope.
No.
Nope.
Damn! This is no fun.
The most current ruling is you have to be at least 30, you can be no more than 30 degrees bend here. You can't even go 45 degrees. Because I pushed the limits on one.
Who came up with that rule?
Probably him.
No, I'm innocent on this one.
But the Chinese style triggers actually have 3 different kinds of triggers. Everybody thinks them all be the same thing, but there's actually 3 of them, and it all has to do with how they actually go into the bow. But the mechanism is essentially the same thing. What we've got is we've got a hook mechanism, we've got a sear, and we've got a trigger mechanism. I've built a couple of them, and it's what my new combat bow for the field is going to be. And honestly, the advantage I can see with it is it will cause less wear on the trigger. It'll be less wear on the string. It's more a linear release than going up out of a slot and forward. So we're not going to have a problem with it doing an arc going up there. Have I seen it on high-speed video? No. Do I want to try to get that done at Penzic? Yes. You ought to believe you won't believe how hard it is to work in a shop by yourself and try to get videotaping the stuff. But they're fairly quick. Now the problem with this is, this depends on gravity. Can that be overcome with a spring? Yes. Did they do it? No, they didn't. Chinese also came up with a Shokonu. And it's a similar crossbow trigger to some others, except that the trigger has a pin that comes out and pushes on the stock when the box is pushed down, which pushes the string up out of the notch to release it. These things are about as prone to jamming as anything known to man. I've been talking to groups all over the world, and nobody seems to be able to get these things to work 100% of the time. They jam about 20%, which as an engineer I find to be totally unacceptable. I want at least 95%. I mean, jamming means you're not going to be able to do anything that's going to take you 20 minutes to get the thing unjammed. But they use little bitty bolts that they put tiger poison on. And who cares if you have a jam on one of the weapons when you have 100 of them firing 20 bolts in a minute.
High capacity with crossbows. Huh?
Yep. Yep. Probably not gonna go through any armor whatsoever, but you know, if you put enough of them downrange, they will find exposed
Peasant
skin.
killers.
Sheriff crossbow. This is the first of the styles that are appropriate for SCA combat, and people use them. We nicknamed them hop lever crossbows. There's a lever on the top, and what it does is you pull the string back, put it in the notch, and you get it out of the notch by taking this little lever and rotating it down with your thumb to pop it out. Now, there's a problem with this. You're only going to be able to do about a 50-pound bow with this, if you can do that. Why? How much force can you put on something with your thumb? How much friction do you think there's going to be between this and the string? So you're going to be limited in how much power you got. Okay? You can go to a notch lock rising trigger, and instead of having your thumb push it up, you can have multiple fingers here pulling up on your grip. Which is stronger, your 3 fingers or your thumb? Okay?
And it's got a fulcrum point.
And it's got a fulcrum point, and you can push it further back. For example, this one, look how far the fulcrum point is from where the trigger is. All the way up here. It'll make a huge difference. You're probably looking at somewhere around 80 to 150 pounds on those. The reason for that is this area right here has a high friction amount. And here's the real trick. You got to get this little notch perfect. Real perfect. Okay? You want a slight little divot in here, but not much of a divot, because the greater the divot, the harder it's going to be to fire. I've seen somebody come in here and put a 45-degree notch in here. Get the string in there and it won't fire at all.
Yep.
Ever. Okay? These work really well. They're really convenient. They eat strings. The serving on your bow gets eaten quickly. But it's documentable and they're a lot of fun to make. Get a little bit better, you get the Roman arcuballista. Okay? Because back in time, we're not sure why the technology got lost, but they were examples of this that had a roller nut in it. Now, what's the deal with the roller nuts? Well, they think they were available around 800 roller nuts because they found some piece of bone that looks like a roller nut. That's all they found. It's a piece of bone. Okay? So, well, how does this work? Well, you put the string behind this notch and it spins on this piece. And all you're going to do with the trigger is prevent that from spinning. That's all you're doing. Everybody says, hey, how do you keep that in place? Well, the most common method is actually string or sinew, not a pin. Everybody thinks a pin. The problem with the pin is the pin has no ability to hold it down. The string does. The pin, all it does is give you a place to spin. And the problem is, when you look at a lot of museums, they'll have some of these bows and it will be broken out, and this little section right in here will be fractured out because it pulled up when it was firing and basically pulled that pin out. What's really funny is you'll find some that have been repaired, they had a pin in them at one time, and then they got string on them afterwards because somebody blew it. Now, is it possible that the Roman arcuballista was made with other trigger mechanisms? Yes, we're not really sure. I did a recent project and I built 2 of them with different trigger styles because I can't tell for sure this is what was used in them. None have ever been found. But the roller nut trigger is found in later period stuff. This one was found, they dated it as 1272. Okay? I'm kind of thinking it looks like a roller nut. But you're noticing a couple things in this. You see this little piece right here? That's a piece of iron in there. A little chip of iron to prevent it from wearing out quite so fast. Almost all the roller nuts have that addition because the bones are actually liable to wear out. Here's a little sear in there in this one. Okay?
So what they're doing is they're putting the little chip of iron where the trigger hits it.
Yep.
It's a sear mechanisms.
Yep, sear mechanism, just simply to take up the abuse that the steel trigger would have done. Now, for smaller stuff and lighter weight stuff, could you actually put a trigger in here that was actually a wooden bar? Yeah, you could. Have we ever found one? No. But you know, if it's a simple enough device, would they have actually bothered to keep it around when others were fancier? Kind of like the whole armor thing. Does everybody wear the fancy plate armor that's attributed to each time period that shows up in museums? Were there simpler versions that we hypothesize were out there?
Yes.
Did they make it through history, or did they get remade into other things?
Made into a pipe.
They became something else. Now, you can go up from the trigger here and put in a socket. Now, I'm going to tell you, the secret to this is this socket. You got to cast them, or machine them, or make them, or something like that, but they sure do make the roller nut work a lot better. And there ain't nothing any more difficult than trying to put a socket into a piece of wood with wood on either side of it. You can just basically hog out a large chunk of the stock, drop this in, it ain't got to be precise, and it works really well. And you've got metal and metal contact there, and if you do it really right, you'll notice this has a slight inward arc. Most people forget that. They'll go and they'll make one of these and they'll make this arc straight up. You don't want that. You want this little arc. Now, why do you want the arc?
Hold the roller nut in.
Holds the roller nut in. Does it make it to get it in there? Because what you have to do is you have to keyhole it in. But in operation, it keeps you from pulling out.
Do you guys want to move this chair right here and we'll move down?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Double axle trigger. Get a little bit more complicated because we have to decrease friction a little bit more to make it a little bit easier to fire. That's what I used on this little item right here. Okay? One of the things you can tell is this little string right here. It's got a string hanging out the end of it. Yep, that string is their version of a cocking device for that trigger. What you're going to do is this little set string. I tell you what, I'd be a mad individual if my set string broke while I was in combat, because you're not going to get it to do. Now, Mike asked me a while back, he said, how long does it take to replace that? Actually, I can pop the pins out of one and do it in about a minute, but I got to be left alone so I can concentrate on all the little fiddly pieces. So I'd say half an hour if I was in the middle of battle. A minute if I'm on at my workbench. Okay, this does the same thing. This little piece right here keeps the roller nut from turning. This just keeps that in place. It allows you to have a much stronger trigger. Now, I'm going to tell you that 500-pound bow, even if it's got one of these, I got to put everything I've got in my hand strength to pull this trigger, because I'm overcoming a lot of friction. Could I make it more of a set trigger so that it's not quite so hard to fire? Yeah, but I'm going to tell you from personal experience, if you've got a 500-pound crossbow cocked in front of you, you're kind of okay with it being hard to fire. Because when it goes, it's the only bow that I know of that it talks to you when it goes off. It's a shook. Stone bow triggers, entirely different thing, because they've got a different kind of release necessary. They're releasing a loop, and it's simply, here's our loop, it's simply a little lever that's allowed to rotate up. I've got one of those here. Little seesaw, and it's held in place. You know, humidity is a bad thing. By the trigger, and when you push it up, it releases and allows the trigger to roll around. Pass that around. Play with it. But you know, it's a mechanism to make that kind of bow work. Could it also be used for a regular crossbow? Probably. Clap lock triggers. They're getting more and more complicated. I'm convinced personally that people after a while started making triggers more complex than they needed to be, and just wanted to brag to their buddies that they had a fancier bow. They had the Lamborghini of crossbows. I mean, at some point you're looking at all these little interlocking parts that go in there and going like, my, that must have been expensive. Is it really going to be that more functional? I'm not too sure. Multi-axle locks. Every one of these is another pin. It sticks out the side of the bow, so you can start counting the number of pins and see how complicated it is, and start going, okay, you know. But it works the same way. All you gotta do is look at a trigger and say, hey, how many pins has it got? more and more capacity. Let's look at the prod attachment. Why does that matter? Does it matter if the prod stays attached to the end of the bow?
Most days.
If it goes down range, you got a problem, right? Okay. This is Gastrophetes, and it was done with a wedge and a rope and a peg. Okay, how tight are you gonna be able to get that? I think there are better ways. Because the tighter it is, the more efficient it is. Wedges can also be done. What's the problem with wedges?
They're gonna work your way
They
out.
come loose, and I'm convinced that this is not an accurate bow. I would never do a wedge like this. For those of you mechanical folks, you'll agree with me, the angle of friction on that is a little bit too steep. Probably would work free too easily. You want it to be a little bit flatter than that. I think that may have been a picture of the decorator model. Bound prods. This is one I did based on Payne Galway's information on how to do it. Takes about an hour to do. And what's the problem with them? What happens as soon as they get rained on? It loosens up and it stretches. If it stretches, you don't have to take it all the way out. You can simply take one side out and rebind one side to tighten it up, because all you're doing is doing the binding on one side. Still, I took a bunch of bows to Estrella one year, and I sat down for a day and a half and just tied prods at Estrella. I'll never do that again. When I do bound prods, I usually sit in front of the TV because it's mindless work.
Does Sinew have that same problem?
Huh?
Sinew?
Sinew will also have a problem because it will moisture. It's kind of like rawhide. You're fine until you get wet.
The artificial stuff is heat sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I ran across at Penzic one year, one that I had bound in 20 years ago was still fine. It still had the original bindings on it. Evidently, they've been lucky and never had to rebind it. Because I can tell my pattern. I mean, you know, I've taught people, other people to do it, but they don't look the same. Kind of like a signature. Wedge bow irons. One of the best methods out there, but also the most widely abused and misused version. If you don't know what you're doing and you put these wedges in there and you get the angle wrong, they work out. And you, greetings, Your Majesty.
Good greetings, sir.
And
Zillion years late.
if your angle of friction is too low, you got all kinds of headaches because they'll come free. And I made a fancy bow for Estrella for an A&S competition. I got fancy and I took that thing and I had the wedges chromed.
This one shoots a little.
Guess what? It didn't hold. Because the chrome was so smooth and so slick, the parts worked free. I ended up finding some fingernail polish to throw on there just to increase the friction on it. I'm going around Estrella looking for, anybody got any fingernail polish or super glue? And they're like, what do you need fingernail polish for? This is called a Tommy Bar bow iron. And honestly, 1620s when they started happening. So for us, it's really on the margin of being out of period. Okay? Because it's got a screw thread in there on each side. They would have been extremely expensive. But I tell you what, it's my favorite for combat because they ain't coming free. But I'm not really sure how period it is. What kind of questions have you got? I've got copies of my documentation in the stuff if y'all want to look at some of those. Since this, I've added probably another 25 books to my library because I've been collecting them. Some of them I can't even read, I just got for the pictures. I got a really nice one from Russia recently that I, you know, probably the only way I'm ever going to get to look at Russian bows. Yeah.
If we were wanting to learn more, is there a book you would point us to as your first choice?
I'll tell you which one it isn't. Payne Galway, Military Sporting History.
Which is the one that a lot of people think is.
It starts with that one, and it's okay. But there's several things in there that are wrong. I would actually prefer Alm's European crossbows. That would be the much better one. But the problem is the really, really good ones are really hard to find. It's an esoteric subject that I'm sorry, but I guess I must be a complete and total geek for going down a path that nobody else wants to do.
Well, you are a geek.
I am a geek. And I would stay away from Mike Lowe's, The Crossbow by Osprey. I hate to say it, I'm not real fond of anything published by Osprey. They got good art that's not necessarily accurate.
You can do good miniatures on that.
It's not much of a scientific or historical reference, but you know, you get some good pictures out of it. Any other questions?
How is the HMSO book on crossbows? It's usually the things that come out of the Her Majesty's stationery office are pretty solid. I know that there's stuff on pilgrim's badges and stuff like that. It's just amazing.
My problem with this book is it's like 48 pages.
So good book, but not very meaty.
It's got some nice surface pictures, but they cut a lot of places that I would love to find more information on. If they could, you know, take some of those pictures and do like 4 or 5 versions of that and get down into the meat a little bit more. 8th grade book.
Gotcha.
No,
Sorry, I thought it might be a good one. Right.
This one, Alm's book. That's the number one, but you're gonna have to look for it. If you can find a used one, go for it. My wife is not allowed to know what I spend on books.
Otherwise, you'd have to build her a new stable.
Mike, you keep saying, Brun keeps saying that, and
She will be bored and won't get all the way through my videos. She tunes out everything when she starts hearing crossbows coming out of my face.
So the Her Majesty's stationary office book is good for just dabbling, looking for surface level.
If you're just looking for something that you want as a service book, this one right here, because the pictures in it
I like it.
are awesome, and they've got a lot of late period engravings on some of their bows. They've got a lot of, I mean, it's just, you know, any of the stuff that shows of this type, because that's everything that's in the Royal Netherlands Army Museum, and they've documented it all, and it's about that thick.
Nice.
Don't start reading that one and looking at the pictures right before going to bed, because you'll be late going to sleep, because you'll finish it.
Good to go on bedtime.
Start flipping through.
One last question for you here.
Yep.
Typically, when you're talking, say, 1350s, 1340s, and later, what was the typical size unit they would put together of crossbows, archers? Because they wouldn't fire just one.
I don't have an answer for you on that, because I was looking at the technology mostly of the bows themselves and never really looked that deep into the units. And
Because that also ties into your rate of fire and everything else.
I would suspect that it had a lot to do with the size of the conflict that I was expecting, and there's probably a relationship there. I know that the unit size for the Qin Dynasty burial had 250 crossbows in it, 2,000 soldiers.
Okay.
That's a firm number because simply they, you know.
They have it. They have the burial.
And it's even more interesting that I found out that they were made in 12 different shops, because they did a analysis of the dimensional triggers, a dimensional analysis of the triggers to show they all came from 12 different molds. And that was it.
Now I'm gonna jump at you with another question on that type of ilk, not that. The crossbows, I mean, the common, put this as bullshit perception, is that the English use longbows and the continent use crossbows.
Uh-huh.
How true is that really?
It's probably true insofar as any generic statement of what happened in period,
Okay.
because there weren't many found, but that doesn't mean that they weren't used. It doesn't mean people didn't bring them back. there weren't as many shops in Europe that were, in England that were making them, but that doesn't mean there weren't any. I find it a little bit off-putting to talk about a weapon only being used by one group of people and never by anybody else.
There's the Genovese crossbowmen mercenary units in the
Yeah.
14th century and beyond, but I'm just,
There are records in English history of, there was an English king who died in a toilet from a crossbow bolt shot, right? There was a child, Royal, who killed himself in a crossbow accident in UK, or what would have been England. So we know they were there.
They show up in 3 different instances of the Norse sagas, crossbows. But everybody says the Vikings wouldn't use them. Well,
BS. That's what I'm saying, is there's gotta be a little BS.
The
Well,
England
the
Empire.
big, I said, the big problem with that, the reason why that's thought that way, is because the 2 major things in history that we have on English bows is Angier Court and then the Mary Rose. And so, yeah, that's a pretty good long period in between those 2, so the assumption becomes England just used bows.
the other thing you find references to that you have to remember, there are guilds in Germany for crossbows. There are guilds for longbows in England.
Wasn't there a law that all Englishmen had to train on the bow? on a
At
certain
one
day of the
time,
week?
yeah.
Yeah.
So all it takes is there to be a promotion of one weapon over the other as being more popular. I'm gonna throw out the whole idea of crossbows would allow the kings to be a little bit more proactive in disarming their population. Crossbows have traditionally been viewed as a poacher's weapon. They're still on the English common law banning crossbows because of it being the poacher's weapon. They still can't use them, and we brought that law over in America, so that for the longest time, you couldn't use a crossbow to hunt in America. Some states still ban it. They say only handicapped people can do it. Georgia, they don't care. They don't care at all.
Well, that even changed, what, 15 years ago? They allowed open crossbow.
I don't know when it changed, because
When
I
I
know when
first
I
got
moved
here,
down
you
here.
couldn't
It's been about 10 or 15
Yeah,
years.
when I first got to Georgia.
Jordan,
you couldn't
Alabama
use
did
it.
about the same time.
I did a happy dance when I moved to Georgia and found out I could use a crossbow legally. But you can't use anything in Illinois, so God help us.
Just use your truck, it's quicker.
Yeah, we just use, whatever we can.
Well, I have a lot more people in here than I expected today. I only brought 12 copies of my documentation.
I've got one.
If
I've got
anybody wants
one
a
to
copy,
spare.
send me
I
an
have the
email.
book.
I've got it as PowerPoint. I've got it here if you want to take it as a PDF. You've got a way to send it to yourself. But that's all I've got, other than crossbows are cool. Y'all ought to have one. Thank you for coming, Your Majesty.
Make sure you, I'm sorry I didn't catch more of it.
Brun, how many of these have you made now?
I'm up to 380 kits and 295 premium bows.
So over 600 bows.
So, before you depart, Your Majesty, she's been quietly not interrupting, Your Majesty.
Now I'm wondering how many of those have shot me personally.
I would say a few of them.
A lot.
So, normally I don't have a conversation like this in public, but I wanted to sort of bring this out, sort of. So, if you weren't aware, Brun won the Penzic Arts and Sciences Championship with crossbow last year. It was extremely impressive. And he was also our top scorer among Kingdom Arts and Sciences, among the people who are going to Penzic. And so I kind of wanted to recognize that and how important it is. When you saw it announced on Facebook, and I'm sorry you heard about it on Facebook because we wanted to talk to you in private first, that we'd asked someone else to represent us at Penzic this year. And the reason for that was that we wanted to sort of spread the wealth and have something that's, yes, it's a different crossbow, but it's another crossbow, because, what is Brun going to do other than crossbows?
We want to give the other kingdoms a fighting chance.
And also, because we kind of have something else in mind for you. So would all the Laurels who are hiding in the hallway please join us? Brun, we hope you don't have big plans for the rest of today because they have plans for you, and we have plans for you this evening. And so we would like at this time to take you away to your vigil. Thank you.
Say yes.
Yes.